So recently I got an email asking me about how exactly Minato knows which one of his place seals he's about to teleport to when he uses Flying Raijin. And quite honestly, while I have done videos explaining how Flying Raijin works, as I sat there and thought about this question, genuinely I didn't really have an answer. Well, at least up until recently, we really didn't have an answer. Because while we can all sit here and say, oh, Flying Raijin works a lot like a sealing jutsu, and therefore you just have to sense the chakra signature you're trying to jump to, figuring that out with hundreds, if not thousands of seals all across the world that never disappear would be incredibly difficult. However, recently, as of chapter 18 of Two Blue Vortex, we were given a little bit of context into how this might have worked, as we saw Boruto struggling with the creation of a jutsu that is technically not Flying Raijin, but operates pretty identically to it. So identically to it that Boruto just ended up naming it Flying Raijin. Hope that's not confusing at all. And thus today I figured, even though I have done a video explaining how Flying Raijin worked a couple years ago, this new copycat jutsu that Boruto has created has given us some additional context to how the inner workings of the jutsu might operate. On top of that, I realized in that previous video, I didn't cover all the actual kinds of Flying Raijin. Because while many would believe that the only kind of Flying Raijin is the kind that Tobirama created and Minato perfected, even before Boruto made his copycat jutsu, there actually already existed two different kinds of Flying Raijin, and I didn't talk about the second kind. And thus today, I want to dedicate this video to explaining each and every single one of these kinds of Flying Raijin and how they differ from each other. And by comparing the similarities and the differences, we can use the context of these three individual jutsu to try and actually finally crack the code on how one of the most popular space-time ninjutsu works inside of the Naruto universe. And therefore, today, we're talking Flying Raijin Explained. Before we get to explaining something that you may believe you understand, but may not understand as well as you could, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. So, there's three different kinds of Flying Raijin now that Boruto has learned some kind of imitation jutsu. The first kind that most people are familiarized with is the Minato/Tobirama variation. Now, both Minato and Tobirama use the exact same kind of Flying Raijin. They use it at different levels of proficiency, but it's the same jutsu. This jutsu was created by Tobirama during the Warring States period because he needed to find a way to surpass the analytical abilities of the Mangekyo Sharingan. Or at least that's why we believe he made it. As really the first instance that we ever see Tobirama use Flying Raijin is while using a variation of Flying Raijin called Flying Raijin Flying Slash, where he essentially teleported to Izuna's location with his sword in hand and cut Izuna with a strike so fast that he wasn't able to dodge or block it. Something that would most likely be impossible for Tobirama or really any member of the Senju when you consider the fact that at this point in time, Izuna had the Mangekyo Sharingan. And while any version of the Sharingan comes with things like boost to your reaction speed, your dexterity, and precognition, the Mangekyo Sharingan is the highest level of that boost outside of something like EMS or maybe even a Rinnegan. However, the idea that a Rinnegan gives you any form of precognition or a widened field of view is actually currently up in the air, considering the fact that Hidari wasn't able to use Chidori, and he's got two Rinnegan. Anyways, not important. What is important is that the Flying Raijin was made to counter the precognition ability of the Sharingan, and therefore Tobirama used it in a very straightforward manner, using the jutsu to teleport over short distances faster than his opponents could react to. And while that is as valid a way to use Flying Raijin as literally any other way, the reason that I always say that Tobirama created Flying Raijin but Minato perfected it is because Minato applied Flying Raijin to way more facets of his combat strategy. See, because while Tobirama would use his Flying Raijin marks to jump out of the way of attacks or attack in straight lines that were so incredibly quick that they were impossible to dodge, the true difference between Tobirama and Minato is volume. See, Minato was well known for placing dozens of seals on dozens of kunai simultaneously, and then throwing those kunai all across a battlefield so that he would have different marks that he could jump to wipe out entire squadrons. And because of this, the way that Minato used Flying Raijin was inherently more versatile, as he could use techniques like Flying Thunder God's Second Step, which is a jutsu that has him throwing a marked Flying Raijin kunai at an opponent, and when they either dodge that kunai or have it phase through them, he teleports to that kunai behind them to land land a Rasengan in their back to ensure that even if people were cognizant that he had the ability to jump to these marked kunai, that they really couldn't stop him from doing whatever he wanted to do on the battlefield. He had infinite escape routes as he was able to cover entire battlefields in kunai that he could jump to at any moment. Kunai could be picked up and thrown behind opponents. Minato could jump to a different kunai and place a kunai from that spot. And not to mention that Minato was not limited to just marking kunai. He could mark the ground, trees, people. And thus, while people would look out for these kunai, as that's usually what Minato would jump to, Minato during combat, simply through the act of coming into contact with you and placing a seal on you, something he could do almost instantaneously, would be able to, at any point for the rest of your life, to jump to you and stab, stab, stab. And because of this, the data books actually call flying Raijin a Juinjutsu, which is rather interesting because the other most well-known Juinjutsu in all of Naruto is the Cursed Seal. See, a Juinjutsu in the Naruto universe is a jutsu that, when placed on somebody else, allows for you to be able to control them. A jutsu that allows for you, through simple hand signs, to be able to control someone's action or place them under unending torment. And thus, the most well-known Juinjutsu in the Naruto universe are things like the Cursed Tongue Eradication Seal that's placed on all of the members of the Root that doesn't allow for them to tell any of the secrets of Konoha and Danzo, the Cursed Seal that Orochimaru places on Sasuke and all of his other experiments, and the Hyuga family side branch seal that allows for them to inflict pain upon side branch family members that aren't falling in line, and also that seals away their Byakugan at the moment of their death. And yet, flying Raijin is also considered one of these jutsu, because the second you are marked with a flying Raijin seal, there is no way to get rid of it. No amount of scrubbing in the world is going to get it off you. There is no Nen exorcist. You can't bask yourself in the smoke of but what's the thing that witchy girls bake to clear areas? Basil? Sage. It's sage. It's been a while since I dated a hippie. Thus, the moment that you are marked with flying Raijin, you are essentially under the control of the person who marked you. Because no matter where you go, for the rest of your life, at any moment, they could appear and kill you. And that's why they don't technically have the ability to control you with a hand seal like the Hyuga main family has over the side branch family. You are basically, from the moment that they mark you, a slave to that person. Now, there is technically a way that one can remove a flying Raijin seal from themselves. However, that way is exceedingly rare, as the only time that we've ever seen a flying Raijin seal removed from somebody's body was in the case of Obito. See, the reason that Minato lets Obito get away at the end of their battle is because Minato knows that he's marked Obito with a flying Raijin seal. And therefore, as soon as Minato is done wrapping up this whole nine-tailed fox business, he would be able to, once he recovered his chakra, to restart that battle against Obito and most likely come out victorious. Now, unfortunately, because Minato doesn't survive the exchange with Kurama, that's something he doesn't get to act on. But some of you are probably here saying, but Nick, that's not the last time that Minato and Obito ever share a battlefield. And you're right. So why wasn't Minato using the flying Raijin seal that he placed on Obito before his death in the Fourth Great Shinobi World War? And the answer is because it wasn't on Obito. Any longer, that is. See, the most unfortunate part about all of this is that Obito did walk around with that flying Raijin seal on him for about 16 years. And thus, if over the course of those 16 years, either Minato was alive for any of those days, or anybody else learned flying Raijin, they would have been able to jump to Minato's side literally whenever they wanted. And while a lot of what I just said probably makes sense to the majority of you, I do want to elaborate on a little thing that I just said there a couple seconds ago. That if anyone, not just Minato, figured out flying Raijin over the course of those 16 years, they could have jumped to Obito's location. And this is true because even though the seals that different people who use flying Raijin use are different, Minato's is text, Tobirama's looks more like a paper talisman, all users of flying Raijin are able to use each other's seals. Which is why Minato and Tobirama are able to use, and I'm gonna have to read this because all flying Raijin names are absurd, Flying Thunder God Mutually Instantaneous Revolving Technique, which is just a really Minato-esque way of saying that Minato and Tobirama use each other's flying Raijin seals. Tobirama is able to jump to Minato's kunai, Minato's able to jump to people that Tobirama has marked, and so on and so forth. However, because Obito undergoes the transformation of becoming the Ten Tails Jinchuriki, his body underwent a transformation that destroyed the seal that Minato had placed on him 16 years prior. So by the time that Minato was revived during the Fourth Great Shinobi World War, he wasn't able to jump to Obito like he would have been able to literally any time prior to the beginning of the Fourth Great Shinobi World War. But still, we haven't answered the question of how Minato knows which seal he's trying to jump to and how he gets there in the first place. See, because even though flying Raijin is often compared to reverse summoning yourself to a different location, Boruto provided us with some pretty important context that either makes anybody using flying Raijin in the first place all the more impressive, or introduce the idea that we need some additional context to explain simply how this crazy jutsu may or may not work. So let me go over what we do know about how the Minato and Tobirama variation of flying Raijin works, and then we'll use the context of what we learned about Boruto's copycat jutsu to possibly explain the intricacies of the reality of how this jutsu actually works. See, what we know from canon material is that a user of flying Raijin is able to teleport themselves to any seal they've placed anywhere on Earth instantaneously. Be that seal on a person that's walking around or moving, on the ground, or on a tree that's been cut down. So long as the seal is still in place, the user can jump to that location. Now, the most impressive instance of this is the deadliest instance of this. That is to say, in circumstances where Minato marked people like Obito, regardless of Obito's location, be it on the move or in a different dimension, as Boruto jumping between dimensions with his version of flying Raijin confirmed that Minato and Tobirama would most likely be able to hop between dimensions, the placer of that flying Raijin seal would be able to tap into the location of the person who was marked wherever they were. And regardless of how far away that person is, the teleportation is instantaneous. See, all teleportation in the Naruto universe is instantaneous, because the completion of a teleportation in Naruto revolves around a dimensional void. As has been established multiple times over, there are multiple dimensions in the Naruto universe. However, between those dimensions is a void. The best way to think about it is the Naruto universe is a giant circle, and within the confines of that circle, there's a bunch of other smaller circles, and every single one of those smaller circles is a dimension. Now, because circles don't align with each other perfectly, there is gaps between these circles, and those gaps are dimensional voids, places devoid of anything. And because these places are devoid of anything, travel through them is instantaneous. They are vacuums. And thus, when a flying Raijin user wants to teleport to a mark even 10 feet in front of them, they will teleport out of their dimension and into the dimensional void, and then pop up at the other seal that they have 10 feet away. This is instantaneous infinite speed. Now, the best way to explain how this works for non-interdimensional travel is to think of every single dimension like a pizza, and all of the air around that pizza is the dimensional void. And thus, if I'm at this part of the pizza and I want to get to this part of the pizza, I can simply pop above or below the pizza into the dimensional void and pop out at whatever coordinates I want to later. But it's not really later because it's instantaneous. And anything, and I mean anything that the user is in contact with, is teleported alongside with them. Their chakra, their weapons, their clothes, even the people that they're holding on to. In fact, users of flying Raijin are able to teleport just objects, or users of flying Raijin are able to teleport an object and themselves to different marks simultaneously. But how does this work with hundreds or thousands of seals out there in the universe? How do they not get mixed up on where they need to teleport? Well, for a long time, the only real answer we had was they don't. They just choose a seal that they want to jump to, and then they're there. However, some context was provided from us from Chapter 16 of Two Blue Vortex in regards to how Boruto's flying Raijin works, which might give us additional context to how Minato and Tobirama's worked. See, Boruto's flying Raijin jutsu isn't actually flying Raijin. It's a jutsu that operates very similarly to flying Raijin, and therefore Boruto named it flying Raijin out of respect for his grandfather, but fundamentally it works different. Mostly because it's worse. See, Boruto doesn't have the ability to make a seal, like Minato or Tobirama, that he can jump to. Rather, Boruto simply has the ability to imbue metal items with chakra. That's right, just metal items. Now, this isn't the craziest thing of all time, as we've seen time and time again, chakra imbued into metal items in the Naruto universe, whether that be lightning chakra running through things like the Executioner Blade or Killer Bee's swords, or Asuma extending the reach of his knuckle blades by applying chakra to them. Time and time again, metal has been shown as a very good conductor of chakra, and therefore, apparently, in the future that Kashin Kochi was telling Boruto about, in order to make a moveset that was able to keep up with the Otsutsuki's dimensional travel, Boruto found a way to reverse engineer flying Raijin by imbuing chakra into metal objects like his sword, kunai, and shuriken, and then teleporting himself to those chakra signatures. Now, the reason that I say that this is a pretty massively nerfed version of flying Raijin is because Boruto doesn't have the ability to mark humans, at least humans without metal, on them. Boruto could mark a kunai and give it to Kawaki, but if Kawaki ever got rid of that kunai, Boruto would simply jump to that kunai and not Kawaki. This is probably a good thing, because the ability to mark people with a flying Raijin seal is one of the most broken things you can do in the Naruto universe. And as Boruto is already hurtling his way towards being the strongest ever person we've seen in the Naruto universe, that additional feather in his cap probably would have been a bit too much. But the reason that Boruto's version of flying Raijin gives us context as to how Minato and Tobirama's flying Raijin worked are the struggles that Boruto faces with his own flying Raijin technique. See, it's established in chapter 18 that Boruto has next to no difficulty teleporting to objects that he can see. So if Boruto imbues his chakra into a kunai and it's lodged in a tree 30 meters away that he can see, he can jump to that kunai with no issues whatsoever. On top of this, Boruto, like his grandfather, would be able to imbue his chakra into multiple kunai and cover an entire battlefield in him and jump to them over the course of that battle. And as long as he could see the kunai that he could jump to whichever one he wanted to whenever he wanted to, and could very feasibly become the second yellow flash of Konoha. However, when Boruto's trying to teleport to kunai or shuriken that he can't see, issues begin to arise. Gashin Koji gives us an example of how Boruto's flying Raijin works by saying that if Boruto had a kunai imbued with his chakra far to the north and far to the south, and he tried to jump to one of them, there's really no guarantee of which kunai he would end up at. And it's because both the kunai up north and the kunai down south are just that, kunai, and therefore fundamentally in his brain from a visualization standpoint, he's kind of jumping to the same thing. So it's kind of a coin flip as to which kunai he would end up at. Now if we're talking about 3 kunai, 4 kunai, 100 kunai, 1,000 kunai, like how Minato had hundreds if not thousands of seals all covering the earth because every single time he placed a seal it was there forever, and therefore every single time he fought using the flying Raijin there was simply more seals for him to go to. For Boruto, this would be a nightmare. It would make his jutsu useless immediately, at least in the circumstance where he was trying to jump to a kunai. Therefore, Boruto wants to be able to teleport to something that he cannot see. The thing he's teleporting to has to be unique, which is why he's prepared a bunch of different metal pins that are shaped like things like a leaf or a sun or a triangle or a circle or a square. Because if Boruto's able to visualize the thing that he wants to jump to, he can jump to it regardless of distance. However, the further the Boruto wants to jump, the longer he has to focus on finding the location of the thing that he's jumping to, as was displayed when he was jumping to Code's location in a different dimension. And thus this tells us that differentiation is key in the likes of Boruto's flying Raijin technique, and that jumping further from your current location is more difficult. So do those same restrictions apply to the likes of Tobirama and Minato? Well, the answer is maybe. See, well, unfortunately, we don't see Minato do a lot of interdimensional hopping. In fact, we don't see Minato ever do any interdimensional hopping, which is why we didn't know until Boruto did it that flying Raijin could travel between dimensions. The majority of the time that we ever see Minato use flying Raijin, it's actually usually pretty up close and personal. Whether it's him jumping to kunai that he's just thrown or trees that he marked a little bit behind him, the furthest we've ever really seen Minato use flying Raijin was in situations like when he was teleporting Naruto away from the paper bombs that Obito placed on him, and when he used flying Raijin to get all of the Shinobi Alliance outside of the 4-sided barrier that they were trapped in with the Ten Tails as the Ten Tails was about to bomb it with a tailed beast ball. But really in all of these scenarios, one could make the argument that all of the places that Minato were jumping were within eyesight. And while yes, we have seen Minato use flying Raijin over relatively great distances, and it didn't appear to take that much more time or really any more time comparatively to when he was using it over short distances, that doesn't mean that some restrictions aren't applied to Minato and Tobirama's brand of flying Raijin, as it's been very well established that the more mass that Minato or Tobirama is trying to teleport through flying Raijin, the lesser the distance it can be teleported. Which is why when Minato used Flying Thunder God Guiding Thunder to create a flying Raijin portal that teleported Kurama's tailed beast ball away from Konoha, he couldn't do the entirety of Konoha a favor and drop it in the hidden sand or something like that, rather electing to send it away from Konoha, but not all that far. However, unfortunately, this seems more in line with the idea of how chakra taxing flying Raijin is, as opposed to difficulties of teleporting something a long distance, as the mass of something being teleported seems to correlate directly to the amount of chakra required to teleport it. And yet the eerie similarities between how Minato and Boruto use flying Raijin, even though they're not the same jutsu, cannot be ignored. While Minato had the ability to jump really wherever he wanted using flying Raijin, he did concentrate the majority of his flying Raijin use into his kunai that he always recollected, reused, and brought with him everywhere he went. But does that imply that Minato, like Boruto, had an easier time jumping to seals that he could see? Actually, maybe. See, if you go ahead and Google, what do Minato's kunai say, you're gonna get a bunch of different answers. And that's because the kanji of Minato's kunai is kind of jargon. It's not real Japanese, and it's also kind of inconsistent. Different kunai say different things. But these aren't the only inconsistencies in Minato's flying Raijin seals. See, because the first two kanji markings out of the 4 that Minato places every time he places a seal are the same in every single one of his seals, be they on a kunai, a person, or the ground. The last two characters actually have a pretty astounding amount of variability. But that's weird. Why would that happen? And the biggest amount of variability that can be seen is between the markings that Minato places on his kunai and the markings that Minato places on, well, everything else. Because while there is usually some consistency on the kanji that we see on the kunai, the only similarities between the markings that Minato places on the ground, people in trees, and the kunai is the first two characters. And this variability in the seals that Minato places in different areas and different things seems to say to me, based off what we learned about Boruto's struggles to jump to similar chakra markings at long distances away, that Minato had different seals for up close and personal jumps and long distance jumps. And therefore, the way that Minato was able to make sure that he could jump to the hidden sand whenever he wanted to is because every single seal that he placed on something that wasn't going to be an item he carried with him for the rest of his life was slightly different from each other. Much in the same way that Boruto uses different pieces of metal to identify where exactly he needs to jump. But some of you are probably thinking to yourself, but Nick, that seems impossible. There's no way that Minato would be able to make 1,000 unique seals. Well, like I said, the kanji in the flying Raijin seal is kind of nonsense. It's always changing, it's hard to decipher, but there is one consistency, and that's the first two characters. So what if in actuality, for Minato at least, because Tobirama's seals look different, the only two characters of the seal that are necessary for Minato to jump to are those first two. And the following two characters to round out the 4 are identification characters. Kind of like flying Raijin, hidden sand, or something like that. Flying Raijin 1-7. Flying Raijin Madara Uchiha. And thus by having these kind of identification kanji characters that all have technically different chakra signatures, Minato is able to keep track of hundreds, if not thousands of seals all across the globe, so long as he could remember which one he was trying to jump to. Now, obviously, this would require Minato to be one of the greatest sensor ninjas of all time, as he would need to be able to identify a chakra signature from possible dimensions away so that he could jump to it, but considering the fact that Boruto is also able to do that, and Boruto's only like 16 years old, it's not crazy to assume that Minato is also capable of it. And this idea is only further corroborated by the fact that Tobirama's flying Raijin seals are completely different from Minato's, which seems to imply that there is no correct way to place a flying Raijin seal, and Tobirama's seals technically have a way wider margin for variability than even Minato's. As like I said, they're basically paper talismans created from a series of 100 or so symbols. And ironically, both of these different seals kind of speak to the people who use them pretty accurately, as Tobirama was a once-in-a-generation genius who created flying Raijin, but because of the perceived complexity of the jutsu, he was only able to use it in a straightforward manner. However, because the jutsu had already been created and Minato was a genius of adaptability, he was able to simplify the jutsu to fit into his relatively simple brain, and because of the simplification and the trimming of the fat and the streamlining of this jutsu from hundreds of characters down to 4, Minato is able to use the technique in a much more versatile way. So how is Minato able to keep track of all of the seals he has scattered across the globe? With a semi-simple Dewey Decimal-esque system. And therefore, while Boruto is able to decide where he's jumping based on the variance of the object that he's trying to get to, Minato is able to jump to an object based off the variance of the seal that he's trying to get to. And this is also most likely how the third iteration of flying Raijin works, which is the flying thunder formation technique. A technique taught to Genma, Raido, and Iwashi that's a cooperation space-time ninjutsu that was taught to the Hokage Guard Platoon by Minato to help the Hokage Guard Platoon in their duties of protecting the Hokage. See, this technique essentially works like flying Raijin, except it takes 3 people to activate, because the chakra required to pull off flying Raijin is ridiculous, and even though Minato spams it left, right, and center, that's because he's Minato. But this technique rather presumably just works like Minato and Tobirama's iteration of flying Raijin, except it takes 3 people locking hands to jump to a marked location, which allows the 3 of them, and who's ever within the confines of the ring that they create, to jump to said marked location. On top of this, because of what happened with Hiruzen and the fact that the Hokage Guard Platoon couldn't get to him in his battle against the Orochimaru, every single Hokage since Tsunade has been marked with a flying thunder formation technique seal, allowing for the Hokage Guard Platoon to teleport to their side whenever the Hokage needs assistance, which is a lot better than throwing yourself against a barrier that lights you on fire. And with that, that's basically everything we know about flying Raijin, now updated with the new information that we've learned from Boruto. But if you guys have any lingering questions about one of the most iconic jutsus in all of Naruto, let me know in the comments below. And while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Now, if you'll excuse me, It's Valentine's Day. But more importantly, it's Justin back.